But then there's Israel in the wilderness, and the Lord fed them every day with manna. They had enough just for that day. And that's been this season for me, is I have enough for today. And being okay with that has been important for me, not to judge myself or criticize myself or to get up and caught up in I'm just not strong as I was or whatever. I'm trusting him for today. He's just looking for a son that will trust him as a father.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Grieve Like a Man podcast. For those of you who have just been waiting with bated breath for this next episode to come out, today is your day. I'm excited to have my friend Bill Johnson on to share about his journey. Before we bring Bill into the conversation, just to give you a little bit of context, as most of you know, I work in the Christian publishing space. Because of that, Bill and I have actually been on the journey together in some form or fashion for between 10 and 11 years. I've been a part of launching multiple books with Bill. And, you know, what's always been funny for me is when Baker hired me to be the senior publicist for Chosen, I was so not charismatic. I was very unfamiliar with this space. And one of my first assignments was to go out to Bethel and visit with Bill and Chris and meet the whole team. And I can say that whole crew in Reading helped me to find a comfortable place in the charismatic world, which has now been my home this whole decade that I've been on the journey. But Bill, you and I were talking before we got into the interview. It's been, about 3 years since we've seen each other. So it's wonderful to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a while. Good to see you.
Well, I think the place I'd love to start, in my world, so many of my friends, people who watch my content, they are very familiar with you. But I think where I'd love to start is just if somebody's meeting you for the first time, or maybe they don't know your and Benny's kind of background, just tell us a little bit about like your guys' story. How long were you married, ministry, kids, just kind of set the backdrop of kind of your journey together.
Yeah, we were married 1973, April, and she graduated to heaven in July of 2022, so 49 years and a few months of marriage. We have 3 children, each married, amazing, really wonderful spouses, perfect for each of them. And from them, we have 11 grandchildren, 2 of which are adopted. And so that's been such a fun part of our life, fun part of our journey. And been pastoring, I was involved in ministry before we got married. And then, that was our entire life, was just serving in the church for all these years. Yeah.
And just in terms of your guys' cancer journey, like I can say, for me, like it was a 19-month journey overall. I know you guys were on that journey a bit longer. Like, tell us how that gets started, because one of the things I really like to focus on too is that in a journey like this to the outside world, often those folks start grieving when our loved one goes home to heaven. But for us along the journey in the middle of everything, I feel like there's a grief that starts from that first diagnosis, just as you're saying goodbye to normalcy and what was. And not that we don't have hope, not that we're not praying, but inside kind of the middle of that storm, there are other things happening kind of that the outside world doesn't see. So I guess tell us how that got started, and just, what was some of your experience with kind of the early grief that is just inevitable?
Yeah, that's well put. The pain of the journey starts, quite a while ago. I forget now. I would say she had the cancer several years ago, and then it came back, and so that was the real the first time. She had a double mastectomy and went through all that process, and then was doing actually quite well. And then she started to not feel well at the end of 2020, and took a while to get her in for appointments and such. And so we got the actual diagnosis early in 2021. So that part of the journey was probably 15, maybe as much as 18 months, somewhere in there. It's it's nothing you'd wish on anyone for sure. Um, but we just went through the process together. I've got a really wonderful staff, and I was able to pretty much concentrate my time, my focus on her. And I would do work from home where necessary. When my daughter was able to come and be with my wife, I would speak on a Sunday, so that would be maybe 1 out of 3 weeks, 1 out of 4 weeks. So I stopped being involved in church board meetings, staff me everything, and just took care of my wife, which was such a great privilege. Very few people have that luxury. So I really am thankful for my team really enabling me to love and serve my wife in that way. It was a real honor.
And that's something I don't think you realize as much in the midst of it, because it's hard and there are long days and there's just a lot of difficulty along that whole journey. And I can say, looking back, and again, my wife transitioned home to heaven about 5 months ago. Like, I really do see it now as a privilege. I think in the middle of the fire and the crazy, not every day felt like such a privilege because there was so much going on. But on this side of it, I can't think of any better way that I could have served and loved my wife and really just fulfilled my covenant and my commitment.
Yeah.
It definitely, I would say, gave both of us an opportunity to step up and really do that in a real complete way. I think one of the challenges I saw, again, we both do life and ministry in the charismatic church space. We pray for healing regularly. We've seen healing manifest, and there's this weird tension that as you're walking out a terminal diagnosis and we're praying for healing, we're not always seeing the results that we want. I guess I'd be curious, because I dealt with that tension the whole way through. How did you walk that out and deal with that tension along the journey? And I'm sure you've had people ask you about things like this throughout your ministry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'll get back to your question, but after she passed away, 2 months later, I met with our staff, and I said, this is a supernatural environment. We see miracles constantly. Ask me any question you want. Our school of ministry, I said, you guys are here to be trained in the supernatural. My wife just died 2 months ago. Ask anything. It's an open mic. And so there was open conversation about this very thing. How do you continue on when you've experienced a loss or a setback or a disappointment? And honestly, life is filled with disappointments. I mean, that's the whole deal. It's why Paul said that he causes all things to work together for good. That verse is completely unnecessary. If everything works the way I want it to work, he gives us those kinds of promises, those insurance policies, if you will, that when things don't work the way we think they should, the way we even since we had a promise for, you have to be able to navigate that stuff. And it's always wise to navigate it in the context of the goodness of God. And so what I guard my heart from is to not blame God, not blame the person I'm praying for, in this case, my wife, never saying you don't have enough faith, nor doing guilt and shame myself, because that doesn't bring about any change. I want to learn from what didn't work. I don't think that is the ultimate will of God, is for people to die with cancer. I don't think it's, or some other accident or tragic disease. I don't think that's his design at all, because otherwise you would have that in Jesus' ministry. You would have him, passing over this one, saying, no, it's your time to die, or, this is suffering that was given to you for a reason. You just don't see it. And Jesus Christ is perfect theology. So our approach is, I want to learn from it. I won't do guilt and shame, because it doesn't bring me into any greater trust, any greater insight. So that's my approach. And what I've been learning is, if I don't know how to navigate disappointment, then I really can't be trusted with the level of fulfillment of promise that he wants for me. And if I can't trust him in the middle of the loss, I can't be trusted with the measure of gain that he desires for me. If I can't trust him with criticism, then I can't be trusted with the level of praise and honor he wants to bring into my life. So life is learning to navigate stuff. And these are storms. And most of what we want in life is on the other side. I mean, if you could picture a sailboat, it's on the other side of adverse winds. Where it's coming from, that's what I ache for, is over there. And so I'm going to have to navigate against these adverse winds to really come into what God has promised. So that's been my approach, is to be careful what I allow my heart, my mind to think and to meditate on, and I have the right and responsibility to ask questions of the Lord, but I won't accuse him. And so I really guard my heart there. So that's my approach.
Well, and I've found, having in God's providence, I've met a lot of widowers in the past several months. And so I've had a lot of interesting conversations, and I found everybody's journey of how they deal with kind of that tension and praying along the way, it varies from time to time. I can say it, in my experience, I had a very strange dream about 6 years ago. This is when we still live back in Illinois, and I'm not a big prophetic dreamer at all. And I had this dream, and in the dream, I knew that my wife was in heaven, and I'm asking my children about getting remarried. Basically, hey, there's this woman, she's the one. I'm basically asking for their blessing, and it was just so odd. Like, I wrote it in my journal. I was like, well, that is the strangest dream ever. And I didn't tell anybody about it. I just kept it. And then when we got that diagnosis, I was like, oh, I do remember that dream. And so I walked it out in this weird tension of believing and continuously praying for healing, but also praying into the future beyond her going home to heaven. Like, if this was a warning dream, or you were just letting me know that this is going to be a reality. So I was like praying in two different seasons throughout the last 2 years, which was just an odd tension. But it did allow Lynette and I to have some really great conversations. And I've spent a bunch of time the last 5-6 years working with people who have near-death experiences and heaven stories. And so because of that dream, it just put us in a place for me to really minister to her and prepare her, I think, for going home to heaven. But it was, I'm the only person I've met so far who's had this odd dynamic of a warning dream, and you're kind of praying on two sides of the fence. It was very strange.
Yeah, that's got to be challenging, for sure. I would still fight for the miracle, and but then afterwards, in fact, my secretary from many years ago, she had cancer, and I had a dream about 3 weeks before she died, and in this dream, it was an unusual dream, but in this dream, she basically, stood before me, saying, I didn't make it. And the reference was to the healing. She was a very godly, wonderful woman, but, she just appeared in this dream and said, we didn't get the healing, we didn't get the breakthrough. So I like 3 weeks still fighting for her miracle. But when she passed and I met with the family, I was able to share the dream with them. And I think dreams like that, they help to comfort afterwards. But I still feel the importance of fighting for the miracle in the middle of anyway. So
absolutely. And that's the thing. We never stop contending and praying for the miracle, even up until the last breath. Because again, we've all heard testimonies of God showing up in those final moments and seconds and everything turning around. And so we need to have faith to always chase those big miracles, regardless of the dreams that we've had. One of the challenges is, I think about, at some point, I'm going to write a grief-themed book in this space. And Destiny Image, we're working with you on a grief-themed book right now that we'll get to in a bit. But just, I would love to see us in the charismatic space develop maybe a little bit better theology of death and dying, in the sense that, like, yes, we're always contending for those miracles that we want to see. But at the same time, like, you have to have a perspective that sometimes it is time for somebody to go home to heaven. And it's not like that's a silver or a bronze medal. We just watched the Olympics. It's not like that's a second prize. Like your loved one is healed and whole on the other side of the veil in heaven. They're with Jesus. That is a wonderful and glorious thing. We're separated from them and we're grieving and we're sad. But that is not a deficient answer to prayer. I guess I'd love to hear from your perspective, maybe pulling on your experience as a pastor. How have you dealt with that when somebody didn't see a miracle, but let's not say second or heaven is second best.
Yeah, a friend of mine says you can't threaten me with heaven, so I like that approach. Yeah, I think part of the healing that takes place for us in grieving is our awareness of eternity. Is actually our awareness of heaven. It's years ago I started reading books about people who had gone to heaven. Jesse Duplantis has a great book, and his story is remarkable. And there's several others that I've read through the years, and they're just so encouraging. And when you live conscious of eternity, you live conscious of heaven itself. I don't mean talking to the dead. I don't mean any of that sort of stuff. What I mean is just living aware of the reality of heaven, the reality of eternity. It's actually greater than this world that we see. Living conscious of that is part of the healing for me. And I think it's critical that we let our imagination, our minds capture what the scripture teaches us about that world, that unseen world. And for me, it's been a huge part of encouragement. When my grandfather died, the family was surrounded his bed, and we were singing these old hymns that he loved so much. And he was a great man of God. And after he breathed his last, we actually sang the Lord's Prayer. And when we got to the part, "For thine is the kingdom, the glory, the power forever, amen," at that moment he died. It was like a Hollywood script, at that exact moment. And so we left, and the mortuary, the people came to pick up his body. And the guy told us later, when he walked into the room, he stopped and he said, "This man knew God," because there was such an angelic presence in honor of his homegoing. And so living aware of that stuff really helps us to navigate that this life is temporary. That one's forever. And our worst day here is nothing to be compared to the glory that is being revealed in eternity. So that's been an important part of my journey for many years as a pastor who walks this through with people, but also in my personal experience.
Yeah, and I can say too, having spent the past 6 years working with so many authors who have been to heaven and had these near-death experiences, was just a huge comfort, because I found Lynette had a lot of questions and was just processing. So I could share the testimonies and stories and the things that people had shared with me and that I've written about in some of our books, and it was just such a big comfort to her. One of the funny things that I talked to her about is like, well, heaven is technically not time bound, it's not location bound, and so just some of the conversations I've had with near-death experiencers about time, I'm like, honestly, it may be like you get home to heaven and the rest of us show up 5 minutes later, because again, they are not, the same constraints we have here on earth technically don't exist in heaven. Now, can I verify that biblically that that's the case? No, but it sounds logical to me.
Yeah, I had a pretty extensive conversation with Jesse Duplantis on this very subject. He called me because he had an encounter where he saw my wife in heaven, and then he said, "How long ago did she die?" And I said, "I think at that time, it was like 6 weeks, 8 weeks." And he said, "This is hard to understand, but from in her world, she's only been there for about 15 minutes." So it's very consistent with what you're saying, and I think that's true. I think that's right. It's hard for us to comprehend what is beyond comprehension. In fact, it's impossible. But it's sure fun to play with and imagine, and especially when you allow your understanding of the goodness of God to shape what you perceive and think. It's very, very wonderful.
And that is one of the things I do appreciate just doing life in this kind of prophetic context, because, a phone call like that, a message like that is extremely encouraging to those of us who've lost a loved one.
Wow.
I had a friend of mine text me the morning that Lynette had passed away and was like, hey, I was dreaming this morning and I saw Lynette in heaven. Like, did something shift? Did something change? And so he shared a vision of what he saw, and I was able to share that with my children, and it just really brought a little bit of peace in what was just an awful moment. And so, I know for those of you watching this here, like, is so far outside of my normal church context, I'm not sure what to do with it. But again, it brought so much comfort in the hours after my wife had passed. And so it was just such a blessing.
True. That's really true. Yeah.
I think, Bill, what I'd love to hear about next is just, and I can say my own journey, the ways God showed up in the middle of just kind of, we had talked about just the privilege of caring for our wives and walking out kind of that hard last season. I'd love to have you just talk a little bit about just the surprising kindness of the Lord in the middle of that, because I just saw Jesus show up everywhere. Like, on this side of it, people were like, wow, brother, you're so strong, and all these, they're like, you're a man of faith, all this stuff. I'm like, but for Jesus, I would be in the loony bin right now. And so I always say it's all Jesus, the fact that I'm upright and I'm sane and all the things. But man, the Lord's kindness just shows up in strange places along that journey. I'd love to hear what that looked like a little bit for you.
Well, that's absolutely true. It says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Mourning done right leads to the Comforter. It is a process of divine encounter. And there is an unusual grace in that moment, whether it's before somebody has died, you're in the tension of praying and fighting against this disease, or it's afterwards. And there's the realization that they're finally home. In that moment, there's a mourning that's important. Nobody avoids mourning in life. Nobody avoids grief. And so we have an option, whether we mourn in a godly way, grieve like a man, do it in a way that we're supposed to, or to do it incorrectly. And in Mark 16, you see the disciples are grieving because Jesus died. And Mary comes and says, he's alive. And it says they were mourning and they didn't believe her. Then the guys that rode to Emmaus come and said, he's alive. And they didn't believe them either. And then Jesus appears and rebukes them, not because they were mourning, but because their mourning led to unbelief. They did not believe the witnesses that he sent to them. So for me, this is the challenge. In fact, this is what I deal with in my book. The challenge is we come to this Y in the road, and none of us avoid grief. We all face pain and loss. So we have this decision to make. Am I going to grieve with hope? If I grieve with hope, it'll take me to the Comforter. If I grieve without hope, then it'll take me to unbelief, and I'll live in resistance to the goodness of God, the revelation of his nature. And so that's the journey that I've been on. And there is such a presence that comes, as you described, even in the process before they go home to be with the Lord. There is just this sense of presence, the sense of great peace. And, we experienced, I'm sure like you did, just great answers to prayer, amazing moments in the Lord. We sat together day after day, quoting scripture and declaring the healing promises of Jesus over her body, over our family, our household. And so we had great moments. We had wonderful leaders, friends, that are really known for extraordinary miracles, just throughout their life and ministry, came to the home and ministered to Benny, and it was very, very, there was just a glory. I remember one time it was just overwhelming, the glory that filled the room. And so you have those moments, and then you experience the loss, and so you've got to put all of it in its place. He says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his godly ones. precious is a term I use, perhaps seeing a new baby. And so I think that's how he looks at our death, is we are born into another world, and he delights in us as a father with a newborn. And so that's, trying to see things from his perspective really helps. It's part of the healing process. But mourning to the Comforter is it.
Well, and this next question, Bill, I guess is maybe just a more of a practical question than a spiritual question per se. But like, one of the things I've noticed in my own journey, just talking with other widowers and people who've lost a spouse, is you at times go through a season of, whether you want to call it second guessing or kind of the would have, should have, could have, like, if only we'd made a different choice back here, or if we'd chosen this other potential form of treatment. Like there is I feel like that's a want where we wish we could go back and maybe have made different decisions or change things in the past because of where we've ended up. As a guy who's further down the road than me, you have more wisdom than me, Pastor Bill. How did you wrestle with those kind of thoughts yourself?
I won't entertain those thoughts, because it only leads to an unanswerable question. I will pray, God, if there were decisions that we made along the way that I need to understand something different, then please teach me, so that the next time I face this with a loved one or a friend, I have greater wisdom. But I won't ponder those things, because there's no satisfactory answer. There's only guilt. There's only regret. Those things are just regret is very. Emotionally, regret is very similar to unforgiveness, because it's anchored to the past, and we can't. I won't allow my heart to go there. It's just not healthy.
That's good advice. I mean, I would say, I mean, the challenge with something like that is, you can't change it anyways, and it's just a ditch where you're just going to kind of wallow in your own pain. Like you can't do anything. Like I always very much tried to maintain the perspective of, all right, we're moving forward, Lord, you and me, we're going to figure this out and keep going and all the things. And so, but I know that can be a place where people in their grief journey, they get trapped there for a long time. And it's really just a place that I think we all should avoid if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It doesn't hurt to learn from the past. But if you find yourself spiraling downwards, emotionally and faith-wise, it's not smart to go there. I don't think. I won't spend my time there.
Bill, next I'd love to hear just what it was like to preach a sermon at Betty's memorial service. Like I had planned to talk after Lynette had passed away, and I had a plan and I had notes, and I couldn't do it. Like I sat in with the rest of the people who were there for memorial, and I comforted my 4-year-old, and I was like, this is a better place for me to be. But what an honor, what a privilege, but also difficult at the same time. Like what was it like to preach the service at her memorial?
Well, I spoke 4 days after she died on our Sunday here. We have 4 services in the morning. And I told the team I can only do this once, so we'll have to play the recording for the other ones. I won't be able to do it again, but I can do it once. And then, of course, 3 weeks later, we had the memorial, the celebration of life service. What was it like? It's always challenging, but my role is a little bit different than yours, in that, I'm leading a congregation, and I can use my loss, I can use my pain as an opportunity to bring people into my journey. And so anything that I'm learning, they get to observe it. They get to, so I won't hide things, I bring it out in the open so that they can all see. That's, you did that with your 4-year-old, but my responsibility was a bit different. In that we're, leading a church and a movement. So I wanted to grab my moment and do the best I can to, like I've told people, I said, I'm not trying to be strong, I'm trying to be faithful. And so I want to grab my moments and make sure that I do everything I can in weakness, in loss, in pain, to give honor to the Lord, to give him the honor that he is worthy of. He didn't stop being worthy when I had loss. So I'm going to keep that as my focus and serve him accordingly. So it was painful, but there was a grace for it. There was a grace for me stepping up to that responsibility, and I'm so glad I did. In my situation, I'm so glad I did because because I grabbed a moment. You don't get these moments very often, and we don't want them very often. But I grabbed the moment and just tried to be faithful with it. And for me, that's what I needed to do. I don't think there's very many people that have that responsibility, to be honest. I don't think, yourself and goodness, 1,000 others, it wouldn't have been healthy or right. But for me, I felt a real mandate from the Lord.
I think next I'd love to have you weigh in on just, I guess I would describe it like this, because like I went into this journey in this season where I'd lost grandparents, I'd lost one of my parents, but I didn't quite know what to expect, what it was like to lose a spouse. And like the only thing I can liken it to is on the other side of it, it feels like I'm navigating life missing a significant limb or some significant ability and skill set that's just gone. And I like that's the one thing, like I if anything, if I can prepare somebody who's walking similar paths to where you and I have walked the last few years, is to just, I don't know if I can get them ready for that, but I think we have an expectation based on how we've processed grief and a loss journey. But man, losing a spouse is something different. I guess, how have you processed that? Maybe what was that like for you? Do you feel like it's the losing a limb kind of scenario I described? What was that like for you?
Yeah, that's a good description. I mean, it's not a theory, it's real. Two were made one. And so when you lose a part of the one, missing a limb or however you want to describe it makes a lot of sense, because you've got someone who has been so intimately and intricately woven. Our lives were woven together. And so when that's gone, there's just a tremendous absence. And I don't know that there's any way to prepare for it. I don't think, you can read all the books, you can do all the praying, you can, do everything you're supposed to do to ready yourself for such a season. But I'm not sure it's possible outside of the experience itself. It really what it is just day-to-day trust in the Lord. It's living in the grace that he gives for me now. And the illustration that I use with our church family, excuse me, is there was a moment where Elijah was fed by the angel of the Lord a couple of times, and he was able to go 30 or 40 days, I forget now, on that one meal. And there are seasons where when the Lord speaks to us and feeds us, we go for an extended period of time on that one word. But then there's Israel in the wilderness, and the Lord fed them every day with manna. They had enough just for that day. And that's been this season for me, is I have enough for today. I don't have a life-altering word for this next phase and season of my life. I just have enough for today. But I have enough for today. And so I'm going to maintain the trust. I'm going to maintain the sense of awareness of his presence, his promise. And I'm not going to, I just can't afford to try to take on more than I have the grace for today. And so being okay with that, as you and I are leaders in this life, and there are seasons where, we have such a sense of direction and destiny and purpose, and sometimes it's so strong, it's like we can run on that word that he gave us, that meal, if you will, for weeks at a time. But then there's other times, like right now, where it's just there's enough for today. And being okay with that has been important for me, not to judge myself or criticize myself or to get up and caught up in I'm just not strong as I was or whatever. Who cares? I'm trusting him for today. And that's all. He's just looking for a son that will trust him as a father. And that's the privilege that I have today, is to trust him.
Yeah, it is interesting trying to get to that place of contentment and realizing that you're enough. What you have in the Lord is enough for where you're at in the journey. And,
Yeah.
I think the also learning to have grace for yourself in the sense that you're not who you were when this started. Like you can't, I don't know, like you have to give yourself time to heal and your body to heal. I think that's probably the biggest surprise to me is after almost 2 years, the toll that just the grief and the stress took on my own body was, I didn't understand it until the last 5 months. Like this is a longer journey than I was expecting in terms
Yeah.
of just everything, health, all the, getting back to a place where I kind of feel normal again.
Yeah.
What are the, again, talking to so many guys who've had similar experiences the past few months, I don't know. I'm curious to see how I answer this. Like on the one hand, like I feel like everybody kind of misses different things. Like I miss all the little things of, just seeing your wife across the room at church and you kind of lock eyes and there's a conversation that happens, or just the day to day of bumping into her in the house and giving her a hug, like just normal, kind of silly stuff. I miss having access to a brilliant female mind to help me navigate life and all those crazy things. So there's that, but there's also like, you realize almost from a preciousness standpoint, you're like, wow, God was so kind with who I married, and I married. So like you appreciate your spouse in a way that I don't think was even possible until on the other side of their home going to heaven. I would just love to hear like what did you realize similarly? Like, wow, God gave me such a blessing with this person.
Yeah, that's well said. It's absolutely true too. I want to fully realize and celebrate who a person is in my life while they're alive. But sometimes you don't know what was there till it's missing. And I think that reality is probably always going to be there. Yeah, after she passed, I felt like, man, I won the lottery, when I married her, because she really was the perfect gift for me. And in the journey since then, we were young when we got married. She was 18, I was 21. And we, and in many ways just grew up together. And so now as a more seasoned adult, doing life without her is very unusual, very strange. And I realize it's really funny. I look at my house and there's a stack of things over in the corner and I go, that's going to be there till Jesus comes if I don't do something about it. I've been accustomed to co-laboring where together we would fix things and sort things, make decisions, and now it's just me. And it's just a very, very strange feeling realizing, that pile of books, that's been there for a while and it's going to be there till Jesus comes if I don't do something about it. And it really represents, all of our life now. There are just certain things, I'll get home. A real sobering moment for me, there are certain things that you expect to feel remorse or grief or whatever. Anniversary, our 50th wedding anniversary, she died 9 months before. So when that day came, of course, there's the realization of loss, birthdays, things like that. But I didn't expect it when I called the American Express card to cancel her card. That caught me off guard. It was such a strange. They were so kind on the other end. In fact, they sent me flowers and stuff. Which is unusual for a business, but anyway, they really tried to serve me in that moment, which caught me way off guard. And then the first Sunday night, she would stay home. Her fatigue level was, she had to watch over her energies, which she did for years, did well. But I'd come home from Sunday night service and she would always be in the home. She's always, cheerful and positive, and she wakes up happy in the morning. And so I'd come home Sunday night and she'd be there to greet me and we'd hang out for a while before retiring. And I just never forget that first Sunday night coming home and it's empty. And such a weird feeling, that this cheerful inspiration is gone. I knew that, but now I know that. And that's just part of the journey, And you really appreciate, really appreciate people. But it also sobers me up in the sense that I want to make sure I'm appreciating the people that are still in my life. And, my children and grandchildren, my friends, staff, just to fully realize who God put me with. It inspires me to make sure I'm doing good.
Yeah, you definitely appreciate so many things differently on the other side of a journey like this. I would say, like the funniest thing for me, after almost 27 years of being together, I never paid bills. Like I made the money, but I never worried about it. So I got a crash course in finances, and we haven't lost the house. I'm not getting delinquency notices, but that's just one of 100 examples of. Yeah, I think as guys, sometimes we have no idea what our wife does at home and how the home keeps going. And boy, you learn when you're now responsible for all the things. I can relate to piles of books everywhere. That's how my house looks now, and I'm just like, there's nobody to tell me to put my books away, And so I'm like, well, they might stay there until Jesus comes back. Really, same as you. One of the other things that I found fascinating in my journey, and again, I still have 9 kids at home, so I do have people running around here. But our relationships change with other people in the sense, like, when you're no longer a married couple and you're just a single guy, like it's just how people relate to you differently, and especially like just church relationships. Like think of how many things our wives orchestrate, and just socially, it's just different. I guess really maybe pulling more on your pastoral hat, like what would you say to just be conscious of how people relate to you, your relationships? You just be ready for they are going to shift, and that's something you have to navigate. It's inevitable.
Yeah, that's true. And that was, I guess if I would have thought about it, that would have made sense to me ahead of time that my relationships are going to change, but I never thought about it. So after she was in heaven, I had to experience that, without any forethought, and just still trying to navigate that part of the journey is just so different. It's not like it's different in an evil way. It's just different, and learning how to relate to people differently. Before, Benny and I would develop a friendship with a couple, and it was just a part of our kind of our corporate journey or corporate expression, but now it's different. And so, and I don't feel like I really know what I'm doing still. It's been 2 years and I'm winging it, but we're certainly trying to learn and being aware that it's just different. It's just, everything is different. And, so just, not to try to super spiritualize the moment, but it really is important that the only safeguard I have is the Holy Spirit. He knows, and I don't know. He knows, situations that I shouldn't enter into because it's a setup. He knows situations that are going to add so much to my life. And so just learning to pay attention to his heart and making sure that I walk, wisely and it's just a part of, it's always been a part of our life, but I just have a new application or a new class. I'm in a new class now, and the tests in this class are different. And, so he's the one who makes sure I succeed. Yeah.
Well, Bill, I was hoping you would have all the answers for me as I navigate this, but I think it's something like I knew it was coming, but I wasn't sure what it was going to look like. And so that's just, I think some of it is just realizing people relate to me differently now that I'm a single guy versus a married guy. It changes some dynamics, and it's just again. There's so many things you just don't actually realize until you kind of fall off the turnip truck, and it's all new for you once again. For you, grief journey processing, journaling, was that a thing for you along the way? I know it wasn't for me as much like walking out Lynette's sickness journey, but on this other side of it, I've journaled a ton, just processing things, and people have given me prophetic words, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I got to kind of keep track of my healing. Like that, not like I want to, it's not that I don't want to forget stuff, but the ways God is moving on this side of everything is so crazy and so huge. Like, I don't want to lose track of that because I feel like I want to tell this restoration redemption story to my kids and grandkids. So that's why I'm recording it. I'm curious, has journaling been a part of your journey at all?
I haven't been. I have kept a very good and lengthy record of the prophetic words and the dreams and things of that nature. But my personal thoughts, my personal musings, I haven't been recording those. I probably should, and I wish I would have done that for the last 50 years, but I haven't done a lot. I've done it here and there, but not. I'm not a good journal person.
Well, that's okay. I went out and bought a really expensive leather journal that was super fancy, where I was like, I know I'm going to feel so bad for spending so much money that I'm going to use it, and it's actually held true. So I'm not saying that's a good solution, but go spend $60 to $100 on a journal. You might actually use it because it costs you a little bit of money.
That's great. Guilt your way into it. That's
pretty much. Whatever
yeah.
it takes to get the result, a little personal guilt, I guess, could be helpful. Any books that you found helpful on the journey? Like, a lot of people recommended C.S. Lewis's book of Grief Observed, which I found helpful. I don't know if he's the original person that came up with kind of the limb analogy, but I know a lot of people say, oh, yes, C.S. Lewis gave that limb analogy. So that is certainly not something that I can be credited with coming up with. But any books that you found helpful along the path?
Not been reading books on grief. I just picked up a Grief Observed. That book. I found it in my office. Somebody gave me an original copy because he wrote it under a pen name. So they gave me one of those copies a while back, and I just saw it in my office and took it home. I think it was yesterday or day before. So I would like to go through that because he's so brilliant. I love that guy. But I haven't been reading. I've read some on heaven. Not to sound super spiritual again, but what I tend to do is I run right to the Psalms and I read and read and read until he speaks to me. And so I've been feeding my heart on, because every emotion in life is found in the Psalms. And so I try to go there. I think it's probably wise to read books on grief and stuff, but I tend not to read a lot when I'm writing, because I don't want what I'm reading to filter into the books I'm writing. And so it's just a personal decision. And I've been working on 2 books since my wife died. So, so one, the Holy Spirit book that's released here this fall, and then another with you guys, the Destroying the Sting of Death. So I tend not to read what I'm writing.
Sure.
And if you're always writing, that means you don't read very much. But
well, and in my experience over the past decade or 11 years, whatever it is that I've known you, you seem to almost always be writing something. So that's probably been an ongoing challenge. The C.S. Lewis book comes up a lot. I've had that recommended by so many people. I can say in my own personal journey, especially on this side of things, healing and recovery, the Psalms have been phenomenal. Like I am living in the Psalms right now, and like Bill said, every emotion is there. You'll see yourself in those pages of Scripture. Bill, if you could talk to your former self, like this is an interesting dynamic.
Okay.
So like with every on this side of the journey, what you've learned, what you've experienced, like if you could tell you starting this journey, any advice or something, like, I can say if I could talk to myself 2 years ago, just that know that the Lord is sufficient for what you're going to face. Like that's the thing that I learned along the journey. Even when I had nothing left, the Lord still gave me more to keep going. For you, what would you tell yourself at the start of this journey?
Oh goodness. There's probably a number of things I could change in what I did, but I honestly can't think of anything. I felt like in the integrity of my heart, I did everything to the full with the understanding that I had. So I have no remorse or guilt in that sense. After she passed, there's a lot of things I would change there. Um, in in realizing the grief that other people are going through, you know, the time of weeping comes to an end, or certainly slows down, and yet it may not have slowed down at all for somebody else, maybe a grandchild or maybe a dear friend, and so living aware that I'm still to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. It means I adjust my experience to theirs. If I had that to do over again, I would do that differently, because I've noticed, I've noticed my children and grandchildren, everybody processes at a different pace, and to be able to adjust as the head of the household, so to speak, to adjust to their pace. Man, I wish I did that better than I have. I feel like I'm doing good now, but I didn't do as good early on. I had this unusual grace to live victoriously in the middle of loss, unusual grace. And it wasn't pretend, it wasn't mind over matter, it was a grace. But that same grace wasn't upon everybody else. And I wish I had that to do over again. So what I would do is say, hey, watch the people around you, because they're going to process, everybody's going to process differently than you do. So live in recognition and in honor of what they are experiencing. And don't try to fix everyone. Sometimes we give advice quickly because then we don't have to walk them through their pain. Sometimes what people need is just somebody to be with them, not somebody who has answers. So that's what I would tell myself.
Yeah, and I think that's something all of us have to face, whether we have kids in the home or our kids and grandkids and all the things. Because I'd kind of alluded to this dynamic earlier, because again, along the journey, when you're in the middle of it, from the diagnosis forward into your day-to-day reality, you are grieving, and like I describe it as there's this weird progressive loss of saying goodbye to things that you see every day, versus people who are outside of your home. They have no clue what your day-to-day is like. And so for so many people, the grief starts in some ways, at the funeral or the memorial service, or when they go home to heaven. And, for me, with 9 kids at home, I've had to learn that they're all at different places. For many of them, this is their first significant loss ever. Or having a 4-year-old, now 5-year-old, like there are just random days where he's acting up and having a rough day, and then he'll be like, I really miss mom. And so just, whether it's your kids or other people, just trying to be, like, I pray about this every day. Help me to be discerning to what my kids need or what other people need, because we do all grieve at our own pace. And, I can say, like, I'm in this, because of my prayer vantage point, because of that dream 6 years ago, am I still grieving? Yes, but I'm in such a healed and whole place that is only possible because I've spent the past 2 years praying about it. And so I feel like it does put me in a position to better minister to my kids and others. But I have to be discerning and paying, because again, can I just give you a hug and you're going to feel better? Actually loving people sometimes means walking alongside them in their aspect of that journey. And yeah, it's hard.
One of the things that I in line with that, one of the things I've been discovering is that just allowing people to verbalize what they're experiencing is actually part of their healing. And being someone who can listen and support and love and care adds to that healing. So, yeah, I wish I was more aware of that, a couple of years ago than I am now. But at least I am now.
Yeah, well, I see, and I feel like that's the sort of thing our wives might have clued us into. Sometimes wives can be so much more discerning about those. It's like, no, that's not what they need. But we learn new skills on our own as we travel this side of the path. We've mentioned that you're working on multiple books. The book that's coming from Destiny Image is unless we change the title, which I don't think we're going to, but hey, it's preliminary. It's sales conference day. We're actually discussing this book right now with our sales team. But June of 2025 is when that'll be out in the marketplace. Current title, Removing the Sting of Death, Experiencing New Depths of God's Presence in Times of Pain, Grief, and Loss. And like, Bill, I know you're still in the midst of working on that, but like who is that book for? Is that for anybody at any stage of a grief journey? Like what, as much as, give us the elevator pitch of who it's for and just a preview of what it'll be about, as much as you can share right now. I don't know where you're at in the manuscript journey.
I've written the book. I've written the book.
Good.
It's done.
Good. Fantastic. That makes me feel better.
Yeah. This one will be earlier than any book I've ever done. I actually went away to England for 20 days and just stayed in a hotel room and wrote and just got a lot of it done. So I'm cleaning it up right now. So I'm adding a few things and editing. But the book's basically done. It's actually for people that are going through loss and grief. But to be honest, I think it's for the body of Christ to understand how we process loss. I really do. I don't think it's just, hopefully it helps the person who's just lost a spouse or a friend, a loved one, or whoever. Hopefully it's helpful to them. That would be a primary target for sure. But to me, it's a much bigger picture. It's learning how to navigate disappointment. It's learning how to navigate loss. It's learning how to walk with somebody that we're close to that has just experienced great pain, has the unanswerable questions, grieving with those who grieve, weeping with those who weep. And it's for that group too. And so I really feel like it's to help us have an understanding. I don't take it's not I'm not a psychologist, so I let them write the books on the stages of grief. I don't have that. What I have is how, in a practical way, Jesus really is enough. And that's the approach of the entire book, is he really, really is enough. He's enough to bring healing. He's enough to bring answers as I need them. He's enough to bring the peace I need in the middle of chaos. He's enough to help me sort through the storm of this problem and that problem. And he really is enough. So that's been my approach to the whole book, is that regardless of where you're at in life, he really is enough.
Well, from my vantage point as the Destiny Image production manager, I get to read it before all the rest of you. So lucky me that I get to work on the book behind the scenes. We're recording this in August of 2024. That means the book should be up and available for pre-order on Amazon at some point in September of 2024. So if you're watching or listening to this from September forward, head over to Amazon. You can pre-order it. Again, look for that to release in retail in June of 2025. And Bill, I just want to say, man, thank you for pouring into us and just sharing honest answers. Because sometimes conversations like this, like I've found talking to other widowers who've had similar experiences, hugely encouraging to me. But at the same time, these are kind of weird conversations to have. And so just thanks for being yourself and pouring into us, man. It's really been a blessing.
Yeah, it's been a privilege. Thanks so much.